Well, it's a new year and a new camera angle optimized to show you the mess on my desk. In this video, I'm going to go through all the movies that I reviewed in 2021 and tell you which ones I actually liked and which ones were not so good. Of course, I'm not going to go too in-depth in any of these about any of these movies because I have a video. I have an individual video about every single one, and if you're curious about the movie, you should go watch that video or just go watch the movie. You probably don't even need me. To be specific, I'm only covering here movies that were covered in individual videos. So one of the earlier videos on my channel is a big, long video entitled My Thoughts on Love Actually, and that is a video where I go over every movie that I watched when I was home last winter. I was home for quite a while because there was this global pandemic, and I watched 60 or so movies. And that was an incredible stretch of movies, probably the best single block of movies I've ever seen. At times, I think I'm going to run out having seen so much stuff already, but it's not the case. And tons of great movies in there, like I said. Not going to be including them here. And in that video, at the end of it, I actually give a ranking of all of those movies. There's one movie that overlaps in both categories, which is All That Jazz. And that's a great movie, but I guess I'm not going to talk about it here. I watched it back then, and I watched it again. So yeah, I'll give you the highs and the lows in no particular order. And then after that, I have a couple of thoughts, a few rambles on just the channel in general, including one somewhat significant change that I'm going to be making in future videos, and some others just sort of general plans, as well as kind of restating what the heck I'm doing here. And if I've actually been, meeting the goals that I set out for, the purpose of this channel, which may or may not be what you think. I don't know. Anyway, let's get started. So yeah, this is not in any particular order. I think we'll go reverse chronologically. So I'll start with the one that I reviewed longest ago and work up to the present because I can remember those better. So it's more than 10 here, I think. Really good movies. The first one I have is The L-Shaped Room. Like I said, you should check out the review for the full thing, but The L-Shaped Room really surprised me. I thought it was just going to be kind of a random British movie. I didn't know much about the director, didn't really even know much about who was in it. This is a movie about a woman who's trying to decide whether or not she wants to have a child. She's not married. And particularly in this era, this is often a concept that would be heavily dramatized. This would be melodramatic, right? But in this movie, instead of melodrama, we have empathy, which is a rare turnaround for this era. This ends up being an extremely incisive, humanist film. Like I said, completely surprised me. The L-Shaped Room, really good movie. Next, Threshold. I think the thumbnail for this was that it was the most underrated movie I've ever seen, and I think that still holds true. This random movie from the 80s, set in a hospital about heart surgery, is an incredible movie. It's got sort of a humanist strand that would make Robert Anderson proud. It's also got some hints of a little bit more intellectual material, some interesting turnaround, some interesting twists, very strong characters, and a very strong movie that I cannot believe so few people have seen. I can't believe what it's rated on IMDb. So that's Threshold. I think a pretty good review. I think the video is pretty good, and that is a phenomenal movie. If you can figure out a way to watch it, you definitely should. Next, we have Up the Down Staircase. This was another really good movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. I think maybe I said that this was the best movie about school, not the best movie set in a school, not some sort of drama, but a movie about school, a movie about education. I think that is true in some ways. This is an extremely wise movie that looks at the personal lives, the intimate lives of some of the students and the teacher, but that also is slyly aware of some bigger questions. For instance, the main teacher in this film, she's an English teacher, and there are times when her students ask her questions about, how they're going to go get a job or something. They say they have to drop out so they can take care of their family and stuff. So she's a teacher at inner city school in Harlem, I think. And she doesn't really have much of an answer for this. The film seems to be slyly aware that, in fact, it's hard to reconcile stuff like English with the state of the world and such. It's hard to reconcile the traditional education system with urban poverty. Of course, it's not saying that we should throw those things out. This is a wonderfully complex movie that you kind of can know from the first second that it's based on a book, and the book was written by a teacher, written by somebody who was there. There's just so many little moments that are so apt, so many rich characters, some of which are hilarious, there's some very funny moments in this movie, and others are much deeper. I think when this film was marketed, it was marketed partly on one small aspect of the film, which is a bit of a romantic plotline between a student and the teacher. And this is by far the worst part of the movie. And it's not a major factor. It's kind of a shame that I think some people think about this movie in that way, because it really doesn't describe the movie at all. Like I said, Up the Down Staircase, incredibly wise, touching movie with, great characters, great insights throughout. Okay, next, So Proudly We Hail. This is an absolute dark horse. This was a movie that I kind of set out to watch because I thought it would be a quirky portrayal of American troops overseas, basically. I thought it would be a quirky sort of war movie that probably wouldn't be particularly... that would probably be quite dated and wouldn't be very good, despite having a rather star-studded cast. But this movie actually completely surprised me. It starts out not in the war, but on a cruise ship. And you realize that it starts out kind of as a catty women's picture, like Stage Door, something from the 30s. Very much concerned with romance, with gossip and things. But then the ship docks, and when the women go to war, we see sort of a ceremonial exorcism of the women's picture and a reassignment of the woman's role to the battlefield, which is pretty interesting and a really great depiction of what the film industry was doing in general, a shift during World War II when suddenly women were needed in the factories and stuff. They were needed as part of the war effort. Hollywood stepped in to make that appealing, to make it seem like the thing to do. And of course, after the war, they kind of reversed course on that. This movie gets you into that. But it's also a pretty darn good movie. The special effects in this were way better than I expected. The characters end up being pretty darn compelling. There's some great twists. It's not mind-blowing. If you've seen war movies, you've probably seen some of the sort of twists they do. You've seen them in other places too. But like I said, it starts out like with all this gossip, with these lightning-fast romances that you think you're never going to become attached to. But by the end of the movie, I really did. And there's a couple just really interesting scenes. I've thought about this movie a lot. I'd recommend you check it out and check out the review, which I think does a really good job of calling out some of these dynamics. Next is a contender for the best movie that I watched this year, the best movie that I reviewed this year. It is I Never Sang for My Father. What can I say about this? Absolutely phenomenal movie. I think the penultimate scene in this movie is perhaps one of the greatest scenes I have ever seen. The acting in this movie from Gene Hackman and Melvin Douglas is, amazing. I just, over the holidays, was reading some of the autobiography of Robert Anderson, who was involved with the making of this film. And it's interesting. This is apparently the film that had the most close ties to his personal life, which is kind of interesting to think about, something I did not know at the time. Yeah, I wish I could say more, and I feel like my review of it was a little bit undercooked as well. But the reality is, this is just a phenomenal movie. It has some goofy style from the time a little bit, but man, if you are into the kind of movies that I mainly am in, which is sort of serious, humanist, social. Well, not so much social as psychological realism. Hard to find something better than I Never Sang for My Father. Next is The Sand Pebbles, right? Another film that Robert Anderson was involved with making. This really is a really long video because it's a really complex movie with a ton of moving parts. Interestingly, people didn't view this very well. This book I was reading about Robert Anderson, I now own, I think, the only scholarly work on Robert Anderson that has ever been written. And I wish that I had had some of this information while I was making these. Apparently, this was not considered a great success by him or the... because he thought that maybe he'd put too much of the book into the movie, that it was too overloaded. In my review, I did mention that there's a couple of times where it seems like we're missing pieces, like it skips over some information. But man, what a rich, multifaceted, interesting story. I think this movie is also on YouTube at the moment, so you can check it out really easily. The Sand Pebbles. I also think that this is, in some ways, Steve McQueen's finest role. That highly controversial, but I get into that a little bit more. Why I think that in the video. really, really interesting movie. Probably not for everyone because it definitely is dated in a couple sort of cringeworthy ways at times, but in other ways, a profoundly wise and incisive and interesting movie. So that's The Sand Pebbles. Next, Girl on the Bridge. What an interesting movie. What a stylish movie. For one, I think another contender for greatest scene in any movie I've ever seen is in this movie. The blind knife throwing scene in this movie is insane. The way the sound, the imagery, the mood all comes together. An extremely stylish movie. In some ways, a little wonky, a little uneven at times. The end of the movie is kind of maybe not as strong as some of the earlier parts. But this is totally a movie worth checking out if you like kind of the retro noir type thing. A movie that is kind of timeless by design. Very interesting movie. The Girl on the Bridge, extremely stylish French film. Totally worth watching. Next, Shame. This is another long video on my channel. I really put this movie under the microscope. And this is a movie that's completely worthy of being looked at closely because it has a lot of moving parts, a lot of interesting things. In that review, I focused on how this film has a lot of different sort of modes to it, a lot of different tones that it dips into, how it's a bit like a lot of other movies. It's a bit like American Psycho, but it's also a bit like Requiem for a Dream. There's a bunch of different sort of hats that it has on. And in some ways, this is extremely effective because it keeps you from really pinpointing the film at any point. In other ways, it might make it seem a little bit half-baked at times, but it's an interesting thing to think about while you watch is just how many different sort of styles it shifts through. One of the main things about this movie is it just seems like it's such fluent direction. Steve McQueen knows what he's doing. Such a fluent use of all kinds of different techniques to evoke totally different vibes all over the place. Really interesting movie, and you know, occasionally I pass by the Standard Hotel here in New York, and I think, oh, I recall that film. Next, Claudine. Claudine is an incredible movie. It has just such a classic vibe to it. It's the kind of movie that you want to show your kids, and you want to have kids just to watch the movie with them, perhaps. It's the kind of movie that's like a family heirloom. It's something to be cherished, something to be passed down, a real sort of classic in that sense. And it's really a shame that this movie isn't more widely known because it is really incredibly good. And I also think it does a pretty good job, a pretty realistic, gritty portrayal of inner city life in New York City, while also, you know, showing some of the true complexity of the situation, but also packaging it into a relatively accessible dramatic package that just about anyone can understand and can be extremely empathetic with. Maybe some people would feel like some parts are oversimplified or something like that, but I think the balance is just right between being kind of a family film and a movie about extremely serious things. Next, we have Sounder. This is another film in a kind of a similar category, but this is set in the past. Extremely good historical drama about sharecroppers and about education, and another movie that I think in a very similar way has a good balance between being pretty accessible but also very serious. This is less of a sort of a fun family movie, but it to some extent has that vibe. Absolutely laser focused, very incisive, an interesting movie. That Sounder, totally worth checking out. Girlfriends. This movie I've actually seen twice now. This is Claudia Weil film from the 70s, legendary independent sort of art house movie, and what a great movie it is. If you like Greta Gerwig or something like that, you should definitely check out this movie because it seems to be the OG in that kind of thing. A really empathetic, really interesting movie with so much vulnerability and to it. Yeah, I can't really recommend Girlfriends enough. An Angel at My Table is a Jane Campion movie about the Kiwi poet, what's her name? Janet Frame. Insanely good movie. This one I was so disappointed by the review because I didn't want to spoil any of it, but I also just wanted to gush about this movie endlessly. You know, this is, I think, it is a breathtaking film with so much so much life in it, so much sacrifice, so many pitfalls, but also so many moments to rejoice and such. One of the things I said in the review that I've reflected on some since then is that this movie really obscures a lot of decision points. You know, it's sort of the classic film logic is that you have a dramatic choice that the character must make. And usually the way it goes is that they take the riskier option. They bet it all, and then they're rewarded for doing that, right? But that's not really how life works most of the time. People don't really take risks very often, and rarely do decisions present themselves as a clear choice between two options. Usually there's kind of one thing available, and when people are faced with two choices or with multiple choices, usually the way they decide is they wait as long as they can. They wait until there's only one decision, only one option, and then they take that. An Angel at My Table kind of reflects this. It's an autobiographical film that has so many different sort of pieces, so many different times in Frame's life, and the transition between them is not big decision points. It's not big taking of a risk. It's just kind of these strange, serendipitous, extremely lifelike transitions from here to there, some of which are heartbreaking, some of which are extremely joyous. This is a kind of a stunning movie. This is probably the other contender for the best movie I watched in 2021, the best movie I reviewed in 2021. Like I said, I still feel like I did not do a very good job reviewing it, but oh well. And then finally, to round it off, we have the two Michael Haneke films that I reviewed this year. There may be more coming in the near future. Cache and Code Inconnu, Code Unknown. In some ways, very similar movies, but Michael Haneke, absolute master of his craft, has an eye for cinematography that's not only creates extremely interesting and visually captivating compositions, but that is extremely deliberate. I talked about the way that he uses sort of constrained angles in both of those movies, and in the film Amour, which was my introduction to him a number of years ago. I think I saw it in theaters. In fact, Amour was one of the films that introduced me to the idea of directorial intent, the idea that the director mattered and was a person who could leave their mark on the film. Auteur theory, some people call that. That was the first time I realized that was a thing, and I realized what the director did just by watching a movie. And in these movies, you can see the same kind of thing. Obviously, Michael Haneke is a complete master, and these are really good movies. Cache, I think, is maybe more accessible because it's a little bit of a suspense thing going on. It's a little bit of a thriller. Code Unknown, I think, to me, is in some ways more interesting, but you can't go wrong with either of those. So those are all the movies that I reviewed this year that I thought were really great and that I would recommend to anyone, anytime. There's a lot of other movies that I reviewed this year that are quite good or quite interesting, but these are the ones that I think are kind of a home run for me and are absolutely worth watching. And now to the movies that were terrible. And some of these made good reviews, I think, and were interesting. But man, I wouldn't really recommend watching any of these movies. There aren't as many. We'll start out with Foxtrot. This was, I think, the first video I did, the first review. Some totally random movie I found on YouTube, basically. And the thing that's interesting about this movie is that it is an art film. And so there is stuff to break down about that. There are some ideas, there are some issues that it's trying to raise. There are some moments, there are some things it's trying to get across. But man, you have to cut through so much mediocrity to get that. You have to dig so far into the sand to figure out what this movie, what the point of it is and why they made it. Steppenwolf was the next movie I did, and this also really is not very good. It has some interesting things in it. It has some interesting quirks. It has some interesting animation in it. But again, there's just a lot of mediocrity before you get much of anywhere. Both these movies have pretty interesting casts, but neither of them are really worth it, and I wouldn't recommend either one. The next movie is The Long, Long Trailer. This is the movie with Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball in it. And to be honest, I remember so little of this movie. It was just so not notable for most of it. There are some interesting things about it. I mean, obviously, all these movies, I reviewed them because there are some interesting aspects of it. I think most of these are good videos. Actually, I think that all of the bad movies produced great videos at a higher rate than the good movies did. The Long, Long Trailer is kind of, I think I took some angle on it of like, van life in the 50s or something like that, because it's about this couple that rent this huge trailer thing, this big Airstream goofy looking 50s trailer, and then they drive around in the trailer, and that's the movie. There's some interesting things you can talk about here, like portable domesticity, I think was one of the themes of the review. But yeah, I hardly remember what happened in this movie, and I wouldn't really recommend watching it, despite some of its quirks. Now we have a real contender for the worst movie of that I reviewed this year, which is The Children of Sanchez. Now, as I said in the review, I watched this movie because I have long been a fan of the Chuck Mangione soundtrack for this movie. Pretty notable recording, and for a long time, the guitar, the acoustic guitar in The Children of Sanchez, the song The Children of Sanchez, is really nicely recorded. In fact, the whole album sounds really good, and I used to use that as a reference track for quite a while. So I've long listened to the song and been interested in the album, and I thought, hey, you know what? I'm doing some videos about weird old movies. Maybe I should watch the movie Children of Sanchez. What a mistake. Horrible movie. Soundtrack better than the movie, without a doubt. Also, the soundtrack doesn't even fit with the movie. Now, there are real intellectual things about this movie. There's real substance to this movie. Occasionally, go check out the review. I talk about it. But man, this movie sucks. Like, it's so... Now, I will say, I had a pretty bad print of the movie, so maybe that was one of the reasons why in all these like really dark scenes, I couldn't even tell what was happening. There were pivotal plot points. I couldn't even understand what was happening. The movie is extremely confusing and extremely hard to follow. They seemingly were aware of this because they add a bunch of like lower thirds from here and there to introduce which characters are which. Hard to keep track of them all. But man, it still is just so confusing. This seems just like a not very strong telenovela. For the most part. That said, to be fair, like I said, there are some interesting moments about it. It is unflinching, you can give it that, and it does give you an interesting look at generational, at a generation of a family strewn across different countries, immigration, assimilation, things like that. There is substance to this movie, and I think it's a good review. But yeah, The Children of Sanchez is not a good movie. Okay, The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit. This movie. Okay, so I don't really follow the stats of my channel very closely, but occasionally I glance at them, and I think that my most disliked video, or at least the one with the worst ratio of likes to dislikes, is The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit. And I would assume this is because some people who are big Disney fans got a hold of that video, and this is a Disney film, and I guess maybe they have some sentimental association with the movie, but this movie is just complete garbage. This was a really good video, though, I think, because I was contrasting it with the man in the gray flannel suit, from which the Disney film regrettably takes its name. Yeah, this movie just sucks. It's just not very well made, not very well acted. It's not funny. It has a couple of decent actors just being reduced to complete mediocrity, which is unfortunate. And it also just represents a certain mainstream, upper middle class mainstream America that's just so bland and lame, in my opinion. I mean, it's a movie about show jumping, which is like terrible for horses and like the most just sort of stuck up Westchester County kind of thing out there. The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit is a film that really incisively puts Connecticut, the Connecticut lifestyle, under a microscope. And The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit is just a complete garbage movie that fumbles around in the same context, but with absolutely nothing to say whatsoever. And yeah, not good. Okay. Another strong contender for the worst movie this year. Yeah, this is a really, really coming down to the wire between The Children of Sanchez and Green Mansions, the Audrey Hepburn film with Anthony Perkins. Oh my goodness. My review of this movie basically descends into a rant. I try not to do that on this channel. There's a lot of channels out there that are devoted towards making fun of bad movies. I'm not interested in that, okay? I don't want to... None of these movies that I review, I think, none of them, the point is not to laugh at how bad they are or anything like that. But this movie, I basically couldn't help it. This movie is just so bad. So why did I even watch it in the first place? Well, it's kind of promising in some ways. It's got Audrey Hepburn. It's got Anthony Perkins. It was directed by Mel Ferrer. It was filmed on location in Bolivia, sort of. Actually, I've been over the break. I was working a fair amount on the Wikipedia page for The Nun's Story, And in reading some of the background material, I learned that, well, I realized for the first time that Green Mansions was filmed directly after The Nun Story. The Nun Story, basically, my all-time favorite movie. There's, in my top 2 movies of all time, basically, at least for right now. And Audrey Hepburn went from that and turned around and made Green Mansions, which is absolutely ridiculous. In fact, when she was in the Belgian Congo, well, the Congo, but then the Belgian Congo doing the location shooting for The Nun Story, Mel Fer was in Bolivia doing the location scouting for Green Mansions. Like I said, they were going to film it on location, but they realized that would be too expensive and too dangerous and such. So instead, they film it on sound stages, which look like absolute garbage. And they do some really horrible, like, rear projection to, like, stick the scenery that was filmed in Bolivia behind people, and then it's terrible matte painting, terrible acting, a horrible plot. This movie makes no sense. It's just, from start to finish, horrible idea, horrible execution, and reducing 2 beloved actors in Audrey Hepburn and Anthony Perkins to a shambles. I mean, Anthony Perkins is horrible in this movie, which is really unfortunate. The only reason to watch this movie is, like, if you're really on a kick trying to watch every Audrey Hepburn movie or every Tony Perkins film. Other than that, just don't do it. There's really no reason to get anywhere near Green Mansions. Quite bad. Okay, so that's a small selection of all the many videos from the year. And yeah, what I actually thought about them. Of course, when I review these things, I'm taking more of an analytical look. I would encourage you to watch most of them, of course. Some of these bad ones, I in the review, I was quick to warn people not to watch them, but I don't spend much time talking about which ones are my favorite or anything like that. That's really not what the channel's about. But hey, for fun, it looks like the movies that were my favorite this year to watch were probably An Angel at My Table and I Never Sang for My Father. And the worst 2 were almost certainly The Children of Sanchez and Green Mansions, which were both just horrible. So that's that. Hey, look, if one of those movies I said I hated turns out to be your favorite movie, don't worry about it. It's all fun and games. Also, get your head examined, because who knows? Anyway, so I also want to take a little bit of a moment to just discuss a couple of things about the channel, things I'm going to change besides just the camera angle, although there will be further upgrades to the visual look of this channel in the near future. That said, my videos are essentially podcasts, so it's kind of irrelevant what is even on the screen, I would imagine. But if you happen to like looking at this thing, you'll get to do that more. First of all, I mean, obviously, the plan is just to keep doing stuff, keep making videos, same schedule, same kind of thing. My goal for this channel, the whole reason I'm doing this, is not to become some famous YouTube celebrity or anything like that. And so far, I'm wildly succeeding at that goal of not becoming widely viewed or anything like that. The goal for me was actually originally to force myself to watch movies more regularly, because before I started doing this, it was really hard to find time to watch movies, which is a real shame because I love doing it. It's interesting. A lot of fun, expands the mind, There's a reason I have seen so many movies. I like it. But one of the tragedies of adulthood is that it can often be very difficult to make time for things that you really want to do and like doing. Sad. So I started doing this sort of video log thing to, watch a movie every week and to share my thoughts about it, to actually think about it. I take notes when I watch these movies, not copious, but I write some things down, and it's good to watch a movie from a perspective of trying to tell other people about it and think about it and such. So that's my main goal. And, that's still going strong. So I will keep doing this. Now, obviously, it's also kind of cool to, interact with other people who are on their own sort of journeys to help, promote old movies and such. Yeah, I try to focus on things that are not widely reviewed and not widely seen to build some kind of base, put something back into the universe that I think is actually valuable, hopefully insightful videos about movies that are not widely known about or reviewed or seen. And I think that's also going great. So yeah, I mean, it's basically just full steam ahead. One thing that is going to change, I think, is that I think I'm going to, starting with the next video, I think I'm going to switch from making reviews to making breakdowns. And this is because reviews, they're kind of dumb. And my videos aren't exactly reviews in any way. I mean, the good ones, at least, the ones that I like the most, are the ones that are the most analytical, the ones that talk about interesting yeah, the ideas behind the movie and ideas that the movie stirred in me. They're not ones in which I sort of subjectively rate the movie or such or nitpick the film. I think there is room for that. And so the breakdowns will have my initial impressions, and they'll have some information about who might like the movie and who might not. But mainly I'm going to try to focus on deeper things. And the other thing is that breakdowns, I think, gives me some leeway to include spoilers in these movies, in the videos, which I think I'm going to start doing. Not universally. There's a lot of movies that you don't really need to get into. Like, when I was reviewing Code Unknown, that's a film that has a plot line that's just sort of all over the place anyway, and it's it's kind of impossible to spoil that movie in some ways. But other movies, I felt kind of hamstrung by trying not to spoil them. So I'm going to be clear about which sections are which. I'll put the spoilers at the end. But with breakdowns, it's going to be aimed more at an audience who has maybe seen the movie to some extent. Although, again, we'll take it sort of case by case, because some of these movies, odds are you haven't seen them. Some of the movies, odds are you're never going to see them, so maybe it doesn't matter so much if I reveal a little bit more of the plot. So the bar shifts around, moves around, but point is, they're going to be breakdowns starting, after this. So this winter I was again home, but this time for a much shorter period of time. Nonetheless, I watched a bunch of movies, and I have notes on them, but I need to record a bunch of videos about them. So I've got a bunch of stuff in the backlog, a bunch of movies to do. Hopefully I can remember what happens in them and such and make good videos about those. That means that there'll be a number of weeks, quite a while actually, before we get caught up with what I'm watching right now. I'm still totally open for suggestions. If anyone by some miracle is still watching this, feel free to suggest something. But keep in mind that I have this huge backlog of things I got to do that I just saw. After that, I have a huge list of things. I have some really interesting movies coming up this year. A great mix, I think, of quirky, odd, interesting movies and really compelling, great movies that haven't been widely enough seen. So hopefully that'll be fun, and we'll all get some joy out of that. I've been thinking a little bit about a couple other formats. I've been thinking about doing reviews of reviews of the film, like reviews of reviews that you see on IMDb. Some of those can be pretty entertaining in how not insightful they are. But I don't really want to bring negativity into it exactly, so I'm not sure if I'll do that, but maybe. Of course, I've been thinking, I think from time to time about whether or not I should do video essays, things that are more highly edited, not freeform, things that include clips of the movie inside of it. And the reality is it takes too much time. One of the hallmarks of this channel is that it's easy for me to sit down and record the videos. I watch the movie, I think about it, write out some notes, and then I record the video. And I can't fit much more than that in my life, sadly. So probably more of the same with some subtle adjustments for the foreseeable future. So hey, if you enjoy that, that's great, and hopefully it can be good for everyone in 2022.